straight from the mayor's mouth, with Matthew Dickerson from Dubbo Regional Council.
Welcome to Straight from the Mayor's Mouth. This is a solo version this week as Mark Barnes is away for several weeks and I also happen to be overseas at the moment. Before I start though, happy Easter to everyone. This is recorded on Easter Sunday, so hopefully people are out there picking up their Easter eggs today, but the whole Easter long weekend, I hope everyone's had a wonderful Easter long weekend. I would ask you though to look at my social media sites at 7 a.m. or after 7 a.m. on Easter Monday, as I have a major announcement that will be released on Easter Monday. But in the meantime, let's get into some of the topics that have been on the minds of people around the area and in relation to council over the last week. The first topic for this week relates to a topic that Mark and I discussed last week as a result of the council meeting that was held the previous Thursday evening, and that was in relation to the sow yards at Dubbo regional livestock markets. And one of the resolutions from that council meeting was to look at a process to go through an EOI to look at the potential sale or lease of the sow yards. And I've had a few inquiries from different people about that particular process and what will occur from that, and some people's desire for council to retain full ownership and the operation of the sow yards. The interesting part here is that no decision has been made by council at this stage. The current operating model is seen as not the best operating model for council and for the residents of Dubbo Regional Council, so we need to look at something different. Whether that is a sale, whether it is a lease, whether that's Dubbo Regional Council retaining full ownership and running the sow yards, those decisions will be made in the future. As I said, at this stage, no decision has been made. But for us, doing our job as councillors to make sure we've got the best outcome for the residents of Dubbo Regional Council, we need to look at all options. One of those options may be sale, one of those options may be lease, but we need to make sure we are fully across all those options, understand the options that are on the table, and then move forward from there. One thing that has been interesting I've found in the discussion has been some people's desire to make sure that council retains ownership of the sow yards. One of the points put forward has been that the sow yards are a great economic boost for Dubbo. Now I fully agree with that. We do have people who travel from far and wide to attend typically our cattle and sheep sales and other sales as well. And that's great for Dubbo. We do receive an economic boost from the sow yards being there. The question I have for people is this: if the sow yards were sold, I'm not saying that's what's happening, but if that was the final outcome, or if there was a long-term lease put in place, so in other words, if council was not running or not in control of the sow yards, would that damage the economic boost to the Dubbo economy? In other words, presumably if someone leased the sow yards or bought the sow yards, they'd still be running the sow yards. They're not going to invest money in a lease, invest money in the purchase if they're not going to continue to run it. So does it really matter whether or not Dubbo Regional Council owns the sow yards to continue to receive that economic boost for Dubbo? In fact, you may well argue that a specialist running the sow yards may well be better off running the sow yards, may do a better job than Dubbo Regional Council, so it may actually increase the economic boost. But that's one of the arguments that I've heard, is that people want to see the economic boost continue, and we certainly do as council as well. But running sow yards is not the specialty of council, so it may well be better off in someone else's hands. A long way to go before anything happens yet. There'll be further discussions in the community. We'll advertise that EOI process. We'll look at the different processes, and they're not tenders, but I'll use the word tenders loosely here, the different tenders that come in for that process, and then we'll have further discussions and make a final decision. But we are many months away from getting to that point. But again, I want you to think about that. Is it important for council to own the sow yards for that economic boost to continue? How does it affect the average person who uses that sow yards, whether they be a producer or whether they be an agent or whether they be a carrier? Whether council owns it or a different entity owns it or runs it, does that really impact the day-to-day operation of the sow yards from that perspective? I'll leave you with that thought and give you the assurance that there are many, many months to go and many discussions to be had before anything final is decided there. Council's biennial survey is currently underway. You may have remembered previous surveys and results from surveys called the Community Needs Survey. It's now called the Community Insights Survey, but the same concept. So this started on the 18th of March. You may well have received a phone call from our interview company, from the contractor that's doing the interviews and doing the surveys for us. So you may well have received a phone call from them. To get statistically valid data, they need to complete 500 surveys. So that means that people will be called, and obviously not everyone will be able to participate in the survey, so they'll call more than 500. They'll need to get to that minimum of 500. If you see 0283582995 calling, and I know many times people see a Sydney phone number, unless it's a friend they have or someone they know, they often think it's a spam call. But if you see 0283582995, then that is our company doing surveys for the biennial survey. So I'd encourage you to take the call and then go through the process to complete that survey. We're pretty close at the time of this recording. We're pretty close to completing most of the surveys, so there's not many to go yet. There have been 380 phone surveys completed. The average duration of the survey is 23.5 minutes. So that gives you an idea of how much time you need to have if someone did call you. So far, we've made over 1,200 contact calls. So getting 380 from those 1,200 is not too bad a ratio, because it's hard for people to have that amount of time available. And essentially, there's that process that will continue on until they get to their 500, and that should be finished sometime in the next few days. You've also got the ability to go online and submit the answers to the same questions. Now, this data is not seen as statistically valid because it's a self-selection survey, whereas the 500 people that are surveyed is much better data because it's a random selection of people, which is different in terms of statistically valid data. But the online survey, you can still complete that. That still gives us interesting information. And probably one of the things that we look at more than anything else from that is the actual comment section, the comments under each one. Again, we're looking at what the community thinks. We're looking at ideas from the community. The whole idea of the survey is really just to make sure that we as councillors and that council in general is delivering for our community, and to see what ways we might be able to deliver better. So again, if you receive that call, I'd encourage you to complete that, or if you wish to, go and complete the online survey and fill in all your details there. Another item as a result of the last council meeting was in relation to the Dream Festival. We are now calling for expression of interest from not-for-profit, cultural or community groups to run the 2024 Dream Festival. The Dream Festival began way back in 2010, and after the 2019 Dream Festival, Events Dubbo Inc., which was the organisation that was running the Dream Festival, asked council to deliver the event as a scope they believe was beyond their capacity. A couple of COVID delays and a storm delay, eventually council ran the event in 2023. But in feedback that we've received from our staff and from the overall event, our staff simply aren't set up to run an event like Dream. So we really want someone, and when I say we, councillors really want someone from the community, some cultural organisation, to grab the Dream Festival and run with it and make it a fantastic event and continue on to run that. Now, council resolved to go out to an EOI process to find an organisation to run the festival, and we've also pledged $40,000 for that organisation to plan and deliver Dream. So we really want to see what is out there, and the overall process here is that we want to see someone grab the Dream Festival and run with it and make it a huge event that brings people from across the state, across the nation to Dubbo for whatever Dream ends up being. And that's the great thing with Dream, there is a lot of flexibility in what it can be. Dream is an acronym that stands for Dubbo Regional Entertainment, Arts and Music. So there's a lot of flexibility, a lot of scope in what people can do with Dream and really make it an event that is identifiable from outside the region, across the state or across the nation, something that is identifiable for Dubbo. The expression of interest are open now as we speak, and they'll close on Sunday the 21st of April this year. The plan would be obviously to deliver Dream again in 2024 this year, and typically it had been around a September, or even in the early days from memory it had been around an October timeframe. So sometime around that timeframe would be when people would be expected to deliver that. But again, the EIO process means that you can put forward what you think Dream should look like and how your organisation will run it best. I hope to see lots of applications, lots of EIOs come in. I hope to see lots of organisations band together to try and deliver something that may be a combination of different organisations. Overall, I think Dream can be a fantastic thing for Dubbo, and we just need some organisations to run with that and make it the event that it could possibly be. On Wednesday during the week, Belgravia, our pool contractor, received notice from New South Wales Health's Environmental Health Officer that 2 people had become ill with Cryptosporidium after using the water slide at the Dubbo Aquatic Leisure Centre. Crypto is a type of gastro caused by the parasite Cryptosporidium. Belgravia followed the incident response protocol for New South Wales Health. The slide was closed, but the 50-metre pool is on the same system, so it also had to be closed. Now, it was reopened again on Saturday, on Easter Saturday, and again we apologise to the community for this particular incident in terms of the pool having to be closed. Cryptosporidium parasites are highly resistant to the levels of chlorine normally found in swimming pools. When you have an incident, the response treatment requires a hyperchlorination of 20 milligrams per litre for a period of 28 hours. The normal rate for a pool is anywhere from say 3 to 10 milligrams. So again, it was open again on Saturday, and we were advised on Wednesday, Belgravia on the front foot with social media to let people in the community know. Now, this is an unfortunate incident, but there has been an increase in cases of crypto in public swimming pools across the state, across the nation over the last 6 to 12 months. So it's certainly not something that's completely out of the ordinary, although it's a bit disappointing. Belgravia certainly haven't been star performers in their management of the pool, but this particular one could have happened to anyone who was managing the pool. While on the subject of water quality, the blue-green algae red alert that had been on Burrendong Dam has been lifted. Now, of course, Burrendong Dam is not managed by council, but a lot of people in our area use Burrendong Dam for recreation. Of course, we use it as a water storage facility for the river, for drinking water and for irrigators, so it is very important to our region. There was a red alert put on Burrendong Dam on the 26th of February. The dam storage is now on amber alert. Blue-green algae occurs naturally and can reproduce quickly in favourable conditions where there is still or slow-flowing water and abundant sunlight and sufficient levels of nutrients. Blue-green algae usually appears as green paint-like scums on the water near the edges or as greenish clumps throughout the water. It does make the water appear dirty, green or discoloured, and generally has a strong musty or earthy odour. If you think you've been affected by blue-green algae, then seek medical advice. But at the moment, that blue-green algae red alert has been lifted and it's back to amber alert. If you live in Wellington, Mumble or Geary, you might experience some changes in your water and your household water supply. We've just commenced flushing of water mains as part of the water and sewer maintenance program. We like to minimise residue build-up in the system and ensure that we supply quality drinking water to everyone in the community. The flushing will take about 2 weeks to complete. It started a little bit before this podcast was recorded, but it should go on for about 2 weeks from there. You may experience low water pressure when the flushing is taking place. You also may see some discoloured water, and that's caused by particles being dislodged as part of the flushing in the water main. If you do see some discoloured water, then run your tap, preferably an outdoors tap, closest to the water meter for a few minutes to clear any discoloration. And if you see that discoloration continue inside, then continue running that tap inside till it flushes out that. Thanks for your patience in this, and we apologise for any inconvenience, but this is all part of delivering high quality water to our community. Council has just started an accessibility trial across several of our websites, in fact 6 of our websites. And the idea here is to make our websites more accessible. This is an external provider, a third-party provider, and their accessibility program has been placed on 6 of our websites, including the Your Say website, our corporate website, and 4 of our service and facility websites. Now, you'll know that this has been placed on there because there's an internationally recognised accessibility icon that's found at the bottom left of the screen. If you see that and you want to take advantage of it, then you obviously just need to click on that and use it. Now, this is in relation to people that have got vision impairments, or they suffer from seizures, or ADHD. You can also do things such as adjust the font size, the line heights, the colours, the orientations, animation, sounds, a whole range of things. Now, we want to make sure that whatever we're doing in the community is useful for our community members. So we're asking you, if you wish to take advantage of this, to have a look at it. The websites will have this accessibility process or the trial on the sites from the 3rd of April, Wednesday the 3rd of April, continue through to Wednesday the 1st of May. We'd ask you to give us some feedback on that, because we've got to make a decision on whether or not we'll continue with the trial or continue putting that into place for all of our websites with this particular provider, or maybe we'll use another provider. It's also got the ability to translate our website into other languages, and at this stage we've just chosen 5 of the top languages spoken by community members who live in the Dubbo region. We're basing that information from our ABS survey from the census, where we know where people are coming from their native tongue as such, and using that information. So have a look at those websites. If you want to give some feedback about it, how well it works for you, if you think there's things that could be improved, let us know so we can make the best decision going forward for how we make those websites more accessible to our diverse community. I'm delivering the podcast to you from overseas this week because I'm on a trip to South Korea and Japan at the moment. The delegation with 8 community members in South Korea as I speak, and then we're moving to Japan where some additional community members will join us. This is an official delegation of representatives from the Dubbo community, 2 councillors in this group, and community members obviously on top of that. A few things to note on this particular delegation. First time in 6 years an official delegation has been to our sister city in Minakamo in Japan. Now, that's obviously because of COVID. That took a big chunk out of that time frame between the last delegation and this one here. It's the first time ever we've been to Cheongju City in South Korea. We don't have a sister city relationship with any city in South Korea, but we are looking at just exploring the potential for some type of relationship with Cheongju City, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. So we've got myself on this particular trip to South Korea and Councillor Shibli Chowdhury. We've also got members of the Sister City Advisory Committee, and we've also got some community members. One thing that I want to absolutely stress here, which people seem to miss every time, from the very time I was elected to council, which was just over 20 years ago, in fact the 20th anniversary of my first election to council occurred during the week, 27th of March 2004 I was first elected to council. In that entire time, in my time on council, there's always been the policy in place back in the old Dubbo City Council days, and certainly now with the Regional Council, that despite the fact that councillors are representing the community when they go on overseas trips, Dubbo Regional Council and Dubbo City Council previously does not pay for any international travel for councillors, does not pay for any international accommodation. So essentially, when you've got myself and Shibli on this trip, we're paying for our plane fares, we're paying for our accommodation ourselves. The other part is you've got community members, people from the community who might be volunteers, for example, on the Sister City Committee, so they're doing something good for the community and contributing. When they travel, they also have to fund their trip themselves, so they're paying for their travel, they're paying for their accommodation, and I think that's a huge commitment. when you look at someone like myself or Shibley, we are representing Dubbo in an official capacity. But these volunteers that come along, I think it is a real mark of respect for those people who pay their own money to come along and represent Dubbo and participate in all the things that we do from an official delegation. And there's a lot of work when you're in these delegations. Many people throw the word junket around quite easily, but they're pretty full-on days. You normally start first thing in the morning. You'll be meeting and looking at some of the things, whether it be tourism aspects or their council or how they run things. And again, I'll go through some of the things that we've done so far on this trip in a moment. But they're part of all of those different aspects. And a lot of those are of great interest to me as a councillor, but from a community member, there may not be such the same focus, but they're still very interested, they still participate, they're still part of these. So they're paying for these things themselves. So it is disappointing when I hear people throw things around about a junket, or when I hear people talk about the incredible cost to the ratepayers of Dubbo for these people to be on this junket. So I can't stress enough. Self-funded, people are paying for these trips themselves to represent our community. Now, I'll go a little bit more into some of the different things that we've done, but for a start, I'll just look at the Minakamo trip, which is coming up, and I'll talk more about that in the next week because at the moment we haven't made it to Japan yet. But that's a relationship that we've had for 35 years. This June, in fact, we celebrate 35 years as an official sister city with Minakamo. With South Korea, we don't have an official sister city. Cheongju is the city that we're in at the moment. That's where I'm recording this podcast from today. And with Cheongju, there's potential there for a relationship, and I'll talk more about that. But again, it's nice to actually have these visits and see what benefits we can get out of these. Now, I have been to Japan previously. I've been to Japan a couple of times previously, and we've certainly hosted Japanese representatives, Minakamo representatives in Dubbo previously. But when I look at something like our Japanese tea house, which I believe absolutely is the most authentic tea house in the nation, keeping in mind that was built in Minakamo, then it was deconstructed, put in containers, shipped over to Dubbo, and then put together by craftsmen from Minakamo. That is a genuine tea house. Our Japanese gardens, we still have gardeners from Minakamo that come across to Dubbo every year to make sure we're maintaining those gardens at the correct level. So when people come and visit the Shoryuan, the Japanese gardens in Dubbo, they know they're getting a genuine experience. So it is something that I think is of incredible value, not just for those particular components, but the students that go on the visits that we have. So we have typically 10 students a year from Dubbo go across to Minakamo each year, and 2 chaperones. And we have the reverse, where students come across from Minakamo to Dubbo. Now we've also got Wujiang as our sister city in China, and again we have those delegations go in both directions. The Japanese delegations only started again at the end of last year. Again, COVID came along and threw a spanner in the works there, and we will resume sister city exchanges and student exchanges with Wujiang. We haven't resumed those at this stage. But I think there's incredible value in all of these, and I'm very excited to see what might happen with South Korea, but also excited to see Japan again and go back and visit Japan from that relationship that we've built up over many years. I actually went across to Japan at the end of last year again. Council didn't fund any part of that trip. That was a different delegation. That was where I led a group of Australia and New Zealand local government representatives across for a different organisation to partake in a delegation and exchange ideas with Japanese local government. But again, I think this whole process of sharing ideas and seeing what we can learn from each other and bring the world closer together, I think there's huge value in that. I'll run through some of the things that we've done so far on this particular trip to South Korea. The first part of the trip, I actually came a day earlier than the rest of the delegation because a meeting had been arranged between myself and Australia's ambassador to South Korea, a gentleman by the name of Jeff Robinson. And I think that was an important meeting to set up this process that we've had in Cheongju. We talked about the importance of the relationship between Korea and Australia, South Korea ranks as the third largest destination for exports from Australia. Australia, on the other hand, is the ninth largest destination for exports from South Korea. So there's certainly value in the exports and the economic process for both countries. And of course, you go back to 1950 to 1953 with the Korean War. Australia stood beside South Korea in the battle that occurred over those 3 years against North Korea. Of course, Australia on the side of the Allies and fighting against North Korea to protect the democracy that we still see today in South Korea. So in South Korea, there's no doubt about it that there is a huge amount of respect for Australians because they know that our community, our country, had people put their lives on the line, and we lost lives obviously in that particular conflict. So there's a huge amount of respect for Australia, but in terms of trading partner, South Korea and Australia do see each other as important trading partners. The next day after that meeting in Seoul with Jeff Robinson, I then went down to Cheongju. Now, we have chosen Cheongju for a particular reason, but I'll run through some of the meetings we had to begin with. So there's 8 people in our delegation, and those 8 people, again, I mentioned before, you've got 2 councillors, you've got some community members, you've got one person, one of our staff members, we've got a sister city officer, and so that's an employed person from council. Now, council does pay for our employee to travel across to sister cities, to South Korea and Japan in this case, and pay for their accommodation. So we don't expect an employee to have to pay their own money, which seems fair and reasonable, but everyone else on the delegation is paying for all of their accommodation and travel themselves. Now, what we've done, first of all, we met with Mayor Lee Byom-seog from Cheongju and met with city officials. And that's always an important part when we start these visits, is to sit down with the local mayor and have a discussion just to get an idea of the similarities and differences between the 2 cities we're talking about. Now, Cheongju is much larger, about 880,000 people, so much larger than Dubbo, but a lot of similarities there as well. It was noted that Cheongju is geographically very close to the centre of South Korea, and we often talk about Dubbo being at the centre of New South Wales. We talked about a range of things in terms of what we do in our service status, how we service the community, some of the farms, some of the rural landscape around the city, the same as Dubbo has. So there are a lot of things, again, in common, a lot of things that are different, but just some of the challenges they're facing. A little bit the same as when I went on a separate delegation to Japan at the end of last year. One of the big issues for Korea in general, and Cheongju in particular, is the fertility rate, somewhere below 0.8. So that means that for every adult female, they're producing 0.8 babies over their lifetime. Now, that is not enough to replace just the female population, but definitely not enough to replace the population. The number that's seen without any immigration to replace your population is approximately 2.1. So each female produces 2.1 children, and that is enough to keep your population at a steady rate. In Australia, we don't even reach 2.1, we're at 1.6, but in South Korea at 0.8 or a little bit less than 0.8, that is a big issue. And again, there are things that we talk about. We talk about one of the problems being lots of people want to move to Dubbo, and we need more housing. In places like Cheongju, there's enough housing, and as that population declines, there's probably too much housing there. Differences there in what we do and how we do it, but again, some of the challenges we have, sustainability, affordability, keeping finances under control, all of these are big decisions. The number of councillors in Cheongju is certainly different, and we found this similar to when we went to Japan last year. There are 42 councillors in the council in Cheongju, 1 mayor, popularly elected, 1 vice mayor, as they call it, not deputy mayor, but they call it vice mayor, but the mayor chooses their own vice mayor. So it's a little bit different to our system. Then we started looking at some of the different areas that we have in Cheongju, and of course a lot longer history in terms of modern history in Korea and in Cheongju than we see in Dubbo. Of course, we've got 60,000 years of Aboriginal history, but in recent history and modern history, of course, we've only got a couple of centuries there. You see a lot longer history in that modern history in Korea. But the Printing Museum we attended the thing that's quite interesting there is that this is the Cheongju Early Printing Museum, and it's located on the site of the Hangdeoksa Temple, hopefully I've pronounced that close to being correct, in which Jikji, the world's oldest existing book printed by a movable metal type, was printed, and that was printed in 1377. And there's a whole museum dedicated to that. And one of the interesting ways that they identified that this was definitely printed by movable metal type was the fact that in the book, and they show examples of this in the museum, there are examples there where there are some characters in the Korean language that are upside down. Now, if you were just going through and drawing or manually writing everything in that particular book, then you wouldn't write a character upside down. If you were using wooden print type rather than metal type, then again you wouldn't carve, because the wooden print blocks were carved, you wouldn't carve out an upside down letter. But the fact that there was some upside down letters in there, what I found interesting about that was that that was a mistake made by someone when they were placing the movable metal types on the printing plates. Obviously, whoever was doing that at the time, you wouldn't want to deliberately make a mistake. It's quite ironic, the fact that a mistake was made there was one of the ways it was easily identified that this was in fact a book printed by a movable metal type, which again, that's the first example in the world they found of movable metal type books. So that was quite fascinating. Movable metal type printing has been described, and this is featured in this museum, as one of the greatest inventions in human history. And it certainly was, or still is, a fantastic way to disseminate information, much better than handwriting, obviously better than wooden block printing as well. While at the printing museum, we got to show off our craft skills by making a book using some of the traditional methods. And that was a lot of fun, putting together a book, putting some patterns on the covers, gluing together parts of it, the old glue stick. I can't remember the last time I used a glue stick, but it was probably back when I was at school, maybe kindergarten, maybe somewhere in early primary school. But it was quite an interesting process. But again, I liked the idea that they had this great history with the printing museum, the Cheongju Early Printing Museum. And so you had this wonderful history, centuries of history there in terms of that printing museum, but also you got to do something quite fun and practical in the Early Printing Museum. We then looked at the National Art Centre. Now, the National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art in Cheongju is a wonderful facility, and this is where I can see the potential for some things. If we did end up being a sister city with Cheongju, then they've got all of their artworks on display as a national museum would have, as you'd expect, but they've also got many of those artworks and artefacts in storage as they might rotate those around. This is just the same as Dubbo. We've got a wonderful Western Plains Cultural Centre, but in the back area of that, you've got a huge number of artworks that are in storage because we're not displaying all of those artworks, all of those pieces all the time. We change those around on a regular basis. And I had the brief discussion with this that if we were a sister city, this might be an opportunity to have some type of display in the National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art, where there was an area that might, for example, have some artworks from Dubbo there, and we might have some artworks in our Western Plains Cultural Centre that came from Cheongju. Now, a whole range of things that would need to happen before that, even just shipping those artworks in both directions, how often you'd change them over, we'd have them on display, a whole range of things. It was really just a thought bubble. But that's the type of thing that you can look at when you've got a sister city, see how we can both gain some advantage out of that, and that might be of incredible interest to people, having some type of South Korean exhibit in there, and certainly in South Korea having some part of Australia on exhibit there. We then moved on to something more traditional, and that was something that we often look at when we go and look at other council facilities in other locations. We moved on to their water treatment facility. Now, having enough water is not a problem for Cheongju. About 1.3 metres of rain each year, 1,300 millimetres of rain they receive each year. They've also got a dam, and that dam is built or has been built to service a population of somewhere in the vicinity of 2 million people. Cheongju is 880,000 people, so their water treatment facility is designed to treat that number. But we had a wonderful look through that facility, looked at the technical processes there, but also physically what they're doing. And one thing that caught my attention is that many of the shelters over part of the areas, they're just starting to put solar panels on those. Now we know, for example, in our water treatment facility, we have to cover up some of our ponds because we have birds who like to come along and do poos in some of those ponds from time to time. So we've got to have ways of keeping them out, and we do put shelters over some of those particular ponds, those initial inlet ponds, but having those shelters made of solar panels would make a lot of sense. We obviously get more sun than Chongju, so that's something that essentially we've got a huge advantage there. But that water treatment facility, again, they've got similar problems that we've got. Crypto is obviously a problem for any water treatment facility. Turbidity, it's interesting that we had some turbidity issues about a year ago, and their standard for turbidity is 0.5, the same as our standard for turbidity. So many things similar. From their perspective, it really is just the scale, the size of their particular water treatment facility compared to ours. Culture was certainly a large part of what we saw in our time in Chongju, and the delegation also had a look at the Chongju National Museum. Now this is an impressive looking building designed by Korea's most renowned architect Kim Swoo-jeon, G-E-U-N, Jeon, and it had a number of wonderful things in there. 2 items that they call national treasures, officially declared national treasures, and also one of the items in there is not a national treasure, it's declared a treasure, which is obviously one step down from a national treasure, but it's the gold crown from the Seobongchong tomb. So there's a gold crown and a gold belt as well. Again, fascinating seeing that, but also fascinating just seeing the amount of emphasis that is on culture, and obviously tourism is a big part of that. Now, the next item, or the next location we visited, was the initial reason that we actually had the initial discussions with Chongju. In Chongju is KSM Metals. Now in Dubbo, we've got Australian Strategic Materials, which actually I incorrectly called them Australian Strategic Minerals last week in the podcast. I apologise for that. ASM is Australian Strategic Materials. Now, just for a brief bit of history there, we've got Algae. Now, Algae had a mine in Peak Hill. Algae currently, which is now finished, they've currently got the Tomingli gold mine, which is still currently in operation. And Algae had started developing the rare earth minerals or polymetallic materials mine at Toongai. It got to the stage where that project, for their own reasons, they decided to break off with a separate publicly listed company. So that company is ASM, Australian Strategic Materials. And they've been working on that particular project for many years now. I can't tell you how many. I remember it has been going on for some time. And the potential for that is huge for Dubbo and huge for the world actually, because the type of products that will be required from that, or the type of products that we mine from that particular project, from that mine, are gaining in demand across the world. And many people are quite open, many organisations, countries are quite open in saying that they want to be able to have good, reliable supply of those products outside of China, because China supplies many of those products at the moment. We're talking about things like zirconium and hafnium and a range of the IUM elements, and these are again often called rare earths or polymetallic products. Now that's all under Australian Strategic Materials now. It's called the Dubbo project. It is out at Toongai, and I've been out at Toongai, and it would be wonderful to see that mine there. There'll be a certain number of people required for the mining process, but a lot more required for the processing part of that. Now, when you've got all of that there, you need somewhere to get to your products to their final state before they can then be sold off to various companies around the world that need those. And I'm talking about products that will be used in electric vehicles, products that will be used in electric motors and in batteries. So you've got a range of products also used in electronics, so high demand products around the world. In Chongju is an organisation called Korean Strategic Materials, and that's or KSM, and that's a company that ASM created to be able to get to the stage where they're doing the final processing for the alloys for these products that will be used around the world. So we went and visited KSM Metals and had a wonderful tour there by the, I don't think he went by the name of CEO, I'm just trying to remember what he actually went by, but essentially the head of that particular organisation here in Korea, and some of the technical staff there as well. And they gave us a presentation, but also we got a chance to have a look through the factory. I got to put an I Love Dubbo sticker on a couple of the components in their factory, which they found very amusing. But this process is that you'll take these raw products from the Dubbo project, they'll be refined to a certain level, then they'll be sent to Korea, to this particular plant here in Cheongju, and that's when those final alloys will be produced, which will then be sold to various organisations around the world. Now they're already starting that process, they're already receiving products, they're already selling those products to companies around the world, but of course the Dubbo project hasn't started yet. So they've already started sourcing some of those raw materials from other mines around the world, but their main focus is to be able to start taking those products from the Dubbo project. They're saying that probably sometime around 2028 will be when those products will start being produced from the Dubbo project and then go through that process. So very important from an economic point of view, that linkage between ASM and KSM, between Korea and Australia, between Dubbo and Cheongju, very important for a long time to come. And again, they were quite open about it. Part of this whole process is so the world doesn't have to rely on China for some of these rare earth materials. Cheongju is obviously aware of just how important the Taronga Western Plains Zoo is in Dubbo to our economy, with anywhere near 350,000 visitors a year going through the zoo. So they arranged a visit to the Cheongju Zoo. Now, nowhere near the same scale as Dubbo. We do have a wonderful open plains zoo, so Cheongju Zoo was certainly a much smaller scale, but certainly they like the idea of being able to rescue animals, bring in animals that are injured, that might have been hit by a car, for example. They've got a process for that, and they've got a process to try and get animals back out into the wild. So we saw a range of parts of that particular zoo there, and obviously very passionate about their animals, which typically I find zookeepers are. What was interesting, they get a fewer number of visitors through the zoo than Dubbo does. They said typically around 250,000 visitors, but the cost for a visitor to go to Cheongju Zoo was only $1. Now, even though that sounds fantastic from a visitor's point of view, the biggest issue that Cheongju Zoo officials talked about was the fact that they simply don't have enough funding to do all the things they'd like to do. The council, rather than the state government in Dubbo, the state government owns Taronga Western Plains Zoo. Here the council owns Cheongju Zoo, but there's always a lot of pressure on the budget for this particular zoo. So it's difficult when you're only charging patrons $1 to come in and see that. But it was interesting to see that zoo, and we often get reminded when we see zoos elsewhere just how good our zoo is. We also visited a traditional market, which is very similar to markets across the world. Lots of activity, lots of things happening there, lots of organised chaos, but chaos is probably too harsh a word, but a lot of activity, a buzz of activity around there. And then we also went to a Korean traditional village. Now, this is a tourist traditional village, but this village has been reconstructed. Now, I mentioned the dam before that's being created to give a secure and consistent water supply to about 2 million residents. The area that was flooded when the dam was constructed had various components, various villages in the particular area when that was first built. So any of those that had historical significance, they took those out. They basically removed those buildings and then reconstructed them. So you've got this beautiful vantage point above the dam. So lots of water, beautiful viewing there, and then high ground where a Korean traditional village has been recreated. So you got to see how different parts of that village worked. Probably the most interesting part that the guide found when he was talking to us, and something that obviously many people are quite fascinated about, is they talked about some of the traditions in Korea. And one of them was that when your parents die, one of your parents dies, or both of them die, the eldest child, he did say eldest son, so I'm not sure if it was eldest son or eldest child, but eldest child has to mourn the death of that particular parent for 3 years. And they did that by having a tomb and then a small hut, a very basic hut that wasn't the main living area, and the oldest child had to live there for that period of time. Now, he did find it amusing because it does seem so foreign to how you would live today and how you would try and do that, how you would try and survive living there, basically mourning the loss of a parent for 3 years. And he did talk about the fact that if you had one parent die and then 3 years later the other parent died, well, that would be 6 years of mourning. But again, it's all about learning about different traditions, different customs in different countries, and realise that we're all different, not wrong, but different. And I think this is part of that overall understanding. We finished off the visit in Chongju with a visit to the Cherry Blossom Festival. Now, we're quite lucky with that because the Cherry Blossom Festival was meant to occur a week earlier, but the cherry blossoms, or the cherries, hadn't blossomed in the time that they would normally blossom, and so we got to see it a week, or when we were there, because it was held off for a week because of those blossoms. So a week later, we just happened to be here and we got to go along and experience that. And again, with so many festivals, it's about food, it's about activity. It was a real buzz around the area as we went through and looked at that. In my opinion, huge amount of value is to be gained for both Dubbo and Chongju City out of having trips like this and discovering more about each other's cities. And I would recommend this for any city across the state, across the nation, to form relationships with international cities or other cities in other countries and see what you can learn from each other, and also help shrink the world. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a summary of what's occurred here so far this week. Of course, no mere podcast would be complete without the Limerick for the week. And this week, with all the discussion around our international visits, I couldn't help but doing this one for this week around South Korea. So here we go. A delegation from Dubbo so keen in South Korea was soon to be seen, with a mission so bright and the neon lit light, they spark friendships, a cultural sheen. Well, that's all I have for you this week. Thanks for tuning in to Straight from the Mayor's Mouth. Hopefully that gives you an update on what's been happening here in South Korea, but also what's been happening back home in Dubbo. People still contact me via phone call, still contact me via email. It's pretty easy internationally these days to stay in touch, and certainly that's what I've still been doing back home. I do hope you had a good Easter, as I said at the beginning of the show. I certainly ask you to look on my social media sites after 7 a.m. on Easter Monday for a major announcement. And we'll move on to Japan, and I'll give you an update next week on how we've gone in Japan and give you any information that's relevant back from home. So that's it this week for Straight from the Mayor's Mouth.
Straight from the Mayor's Mouth with Matthew Dickerson from Dubbo Regional Council.